Welcome back to Project Methania. In the last episode, we explored how life spread across Methania, creating fascinating biomes such as floating islands and kelp forests. We also witnessed the emergence of fungi like Radicis Amara and terrestrial plants, which paved the way for the first terrestrial animals to adapt and live in coastal swamps. In this episode, we will observe how life continues to spread and diversify, filling out numerous ecological niches across Methania's varied landscape. So, let's start. The pioneer species mentioned before also had a significant influence on the conditions of Methania. While we've already observed how Radicis Amara contributed to the development of softer soil through the use of the oxalic acid, we haven't yet discussed how the emergence of the first terrestrial plants affected the atmosphere. On Earth, the colonization and diversification of the first terrestrial plants led to an event known as Silurian-Devonian terrestrial revolution, which resulted in a significant increase in oxygen and decrease in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. This occurred due to excessive photosynthesis that was less impacted by herbivory, as herbivores were not as widespread as they are today. On Methania, first terrestrial plants emerged long before terrestrial herbivores, occupied a big amount of land, and diversified into Clathromethanosa and Herbithosa, which led to a similar event called Clathromethanian-Rimarian terrestrial revolution. It increased the level of hydrogen and decreased the level of methane in the atmosphere. While these changes slowed down the growth of plants, they allowed animals, especially those with passive form of respiration, to increase their metabolic rates and reproduce more often. These changes led to a significant boost in the biomass for both plants and animals in coastal environments, which in turn resulted in increased detritus. For so long, the main detritus consumers were terrestrial bacteria and Radicis Amara. But at some point, a group of pentacrabs called Pentacrab Ossifragus will evolve to occupy this niche as well. Their front limbs will get much bigger and develop a layer of tougher exoskeleton, which will allow them to crack shells and bones of dead animals to access bone marrow. Not only that, but they will also increase the length of their mouth tentacles, which will allow them to reach the hard-to-access parts of dead animals, so they could extract even more nutrients. But before they switch to Detritivores completely, they will need to undergo one very important change. The digestive system of their ancestors was adapted to be long, giving fibrous plant matter more time to be thoroughly broken down and absorbed. However, once they switch to Detritivores, their digestive system might shorten and evolve to handle the simpler, more readily digestible organic matter found in decomposed material. Another change in their digestive system that they will need to undergo is a way of handling oxalic acid, which will often be found on dead bodies if Radicis Amara starts growing on them first. To tolerate this acid, they will develop an ammonia-containing chamber in their digestive system that will be responsible for neutralization of this acid and will help them with breaking down dead matter. To produce the necessary ammonia, they will engage in a symbiotic relationship with ammonia-producing bacteria, which they will provide with a part of their sugars. Interestingly enough, since these bacteria will rely on atmospheric hydrogen and nitrogen, this process will be somewhat easier to them compared to bacteria found on Earth, as Methania's hydrogen-rich atmosphere will provide more accessible hydrogen. Both needing to rely on symbionts and switching to Detritivores may result in a slight reduction in the body size of Pentacrab Ossifragus. But detritus will not only be found on land. A big part of it will originate or be transported by rain from land to the water. This detritus will accumulate in the areas with very little water flow, such as shallow swamps, which will in turn lead to reduced light penetration, leaving underwater Clathromethanosa with less and less sunlight. As a solution for this change, a small group called Hydrophylithosa will evolve to float on the surface of the water, rather than using its roots to stick to the ground. Since the formation of areas like this will be unpredictable and often rely on the time of the year, these plants will need to occupy them as fast as possible to avoid competition with overall plants and other members of their species. To facilitate this, their overall size will be reduced and they will start to participate in budding more often, so they could increase their reproduction rate. This fast and excessive growth will often lead to the formation of thick mats on the surface of the water that will block sunlight from reaching aquatic plants below. Not only that, but these mats will also hinder the gas exchange between the air and water, leading to low hydrogen levels in the water, which in turn will make it more difficult for aquatic organisms to survive in these waters. In some critical cases, it might even lead to the formation of so-called dead zones. While in this clade of plants, increased biomass led to the development of a higher reproductive rate, in another clade, it might lead to the development of completely different strategies. You see, once Arbithosa starts to grow closer and closer together, it will lead to numerous problems. As you might remember, most plants of Methania have a mobile life stage that can last from a few hours in Clathromethania and up to several days in Arbithosa. While smaller plants such as Clathromethania will not have any significant problems by growing close to each other, bigger plants that rely on more nutrients such as Arbithosa might experience population decline, as their larvae won't be able to find an occupied fertile place to settle while in their mobile stage. To address this problem, some of these trees may provide their larvae with more sugars and fats, allowing them to travel further using their simple hydraulic limbs and hydrogen-filled leaf chambers. This way, they will have a higher chance of finding a perfect place where they can begin their adult life. Along with that, this larva might also develop 6 antenna-like appendages, allowing them to navigate more efficiently and further examine the quality of the soil. Let's call this group Cepathosa. Of course, by the moment Cepathosa evolves, most of the land will be already occupied by Arbithosa, and these newly developed trees will start living in rare unoccupied small areas near the coast and in more unique environments, such as steppes, but we will talk about them later. As you might remember, in the last episode we explored how the first pentacrabs colonized land and how they were able to climb trees to some degree. It was primarily done to avoid carnivorous DinosaurDude, but also allowed them to feed on leaves of Arbithosa when Clathromethania was scarce. But now that hydrogen levels in the atmosphere reach historical high, allowing them to be more productive and grow larger, and Cepathosa developing nutrients larvae, some pentacrabs might completely switch to an arboreal lifestyle, only leaving trees on rare occasions. To assist them with this navigation, their limbs will get longer and more muscular. The tips of them will develop several hook-like structures that will help them to grasp the rough texture of the tree bark. And for increased flexibility, their body might elongate and their rigid shell may split into 5 segments, allowing them to bend from side to side while moving. As observed among several arboreal species on Earth, many have developed binocular vision that enhances depth perception and allows for more accurate judging of distances between branches and trees to happen. For these pentacrabs, their eyes might move to the front of their bodies, with one pair becoming significantly bigger compared to others, to improve their depth perception, similarly to arboreal species on Earth. As they start to rely on larvae of Cepathosa as their main source of nutrients, their mouth appendages might elongate and become more specialized, allowing them to reach into crevices and extract growing larvae. With this diet and increased hydrogen levels in the atmosphere, they will be able to increase their body size, reaching up to 30 cm in length. Let's call this group Ascendipenta. Along with a lifestyle that relies less on marine environments, both Ascendipenta and Pentacrab Ossifragus will need to develop new reproductive processes that will better match their new environments. Until now, all pentacrabs reproduce through a process that involves a larval stage. Although while living in the water having it allow them to swim freely and therefore avoid predators, on land supporting active movement might cost a lot more energy due to lack of buoyant forces of the water. However, investing more and more resources into larval development might not be the strategy that will be the most beneficial for these pentacrabs, as they mostly rely on air selection, since their only way to secure their survival is to reproduce faster than predators can eat them. For this purpose, they will be more likely to develop a tough shell made of chitin around their larva, that might later develop a function similar to an egg, protecting this larva against predators and natural disasters. Additionally, among arboreal Ascendipenta, eggs might develop a tree-like color and texture, as well as a glue-like substance that will allow them to stick to the tree bark, thereby removing the need of moving to the ground to lay eggs. This will also be followed by a flatter shape that will increase the area of the sticky surface. For both Ascendipenta and Pentacrab Ossifragus, development of an egg-laying behavior will play a crucial role in their further development and adaptation. Meanwhile, in response to arboreal adaptation among pentacrabs, a group of DinosaurDude that primarily preyed on them on the ground might have developed a way of climbing trees as well. Similar to Ascendipenta, Their limbs will elongate and become more muscular. Unlike a Ascendipenta, however, they will not develop hook-like structures. Instead of that, their limbs and fingers might get long enough so they could engage in the form of arboreal locomotion called suspensoriality, which is signified by suspension of an organism below or among tree branches and can be found among many species, such as primates, bats, and sloths. While current plants on Methania don't have branches, their trunks might bend in various directions and grow close to each other, thereby creating structures somewhat similar to branches on Earth. As their habitat got more complex compared to shallow swamps they originated from, their behavioral complexity might increase as well. Because their habitats will be restricted to areas where Cepathosa eating Ascendipenta can live, average competition for their resources will increase, which might lead to the development of stable groups that will defend their territories and resources from other groups. Communication among these groups will be executed through release of chemicals with strong odor, produced by modified glands in their mouth, and clicking sounds made by their mouth appendages. Another notable adaptation that will emerge is the development of spikes on their shells that will serve not for locomotion or protection, but as a fitness display. Along with length and sharpness, one of the most important characteristics will be how well preserved they are. Best climbers were able to avoid falling and prevented their spikes from breaking, thereby demonstrating their superior climbing abilities, allowing them to spread their genes more effectively. These spikes will also be a form of sexual dimorphism, appearing predominantly in males. Since females often prioritize energy conservation for reproduction and development of the offsprings rather than competing for males, their spikes will appear shorter and less colorful. Similarly to pentacrabs, their new arboreal lifestyle will require change in their reproductive processes. Unlike pentacrabs, however, by being top predator, they will most likely engage in case selection, with having fewer but more developed offspring. While their ancestors carried seminated egg cells until they develop into larvae, these new species might carry them until they develop into a life stage that will mostly resemble the miniature version of the adult. This way, these newborns will have a much higher chance of survival, but it will also increase the cost of development, which will lead to a much longer offspring development phase. To secure their safety during this phase, they will develop two enclosed chambers where the embryos are shielded from environmental threats. This way of reproduction will be somewhat similar to viviparity that can be found in sharks and some insects, where newborns are mostly independent. With all this adaptation, this newly formed group called Spinosum Arbopedetis will be able to thrive and diversify into numerous species. One of those species will be Aerogastor, that evolved from those Spinosum Arbopedetis that were forced to live in Herbithosa forests, where arboreal Ascendipenta were rarely found. In conditions like this, they will be most likely to take the niche of small herbivores, similar to Ascendipenta in Cepathosa forests. The first major change they will experience is the degradation of their behavioral complexity, caused by absence of territoriality, leading to the loss of male competition, weaker sexual dimorphism, and change of their size, caused by a diet mostly composed of leaves. As you might remember, trees on Methania fill their leaves with hydrogen to support them with uplifting power. Aerogasters that already feed on these leaves might adapt their respiratory system to obtain and store this hydrogen. To do so, the entry of the respiratory system will elongate, thereby forming a shape similar to proboscis found in insects, that they will use to penetrate hydrogen-filled leaves and absorb hydrogen they store. Later, it will travel into a chamber in the respiratory system that developed from the first pair of their exit canals, thereby making them more buoyant. To make this effect even stronger, they will evolve to have softer bones with several air pockets, thereby reducing their weight and allowing them to float. To enhance their ability to float and move between trees, their back pair of flaps that played a minor role in thermoregulation will be modified to serve as a simple wing-like structure, allowing them to propel themselves to some extent. Additionally to that, their limbs might elongate and develop some simple hooking structures, allowing them to engage in arboreal locomotion opposite to brachiation, where in length hanging from the tree branches, they will hold onto them, thereby preventing them from floating away. Another change that they will need to undergo is the change in their reproductive process. As mentioned before, their ancestors were engaging in case strategy, carrying their offsprings in enclosed chambers within their body. For Aerogasters, however, carrying their offsprings while they are growing might significantly hinder their ability to fly, Instead of that, they might carry them until they develop into a simple larval stage that will be able to provide nutrients for themselves. In many insect clades, larvae often occupy a different niche from their parents, allowing them to compete less by feeding on different food sources. This phenomenon is often referred to as an ontogenetic niche shift, and is often associated with metamorphism, where the parent body plan significantly differs from larval. In case of Aerogasters, their larvae might develop a symbiosis with xylophagous bacteria that will allow them to feed on tree gel-like wood, similar to how xylophags on Earth are able to convert cellulose into glucose with help of water. Additionally, these larvae might develop strong mouth parts that will allow them to burrow through trees' interior. Their eyes and limbs, however, will be significantly simplified, as they will not play an important role in the development stage and will become more complex as they enter the adult stage of their life. The average number of larvae laid by Aerogasters will lay between 2 and 6, but this will be significantly influenced by a newly introduced species. As the Arbithosa forest ecosystem starts growing, a group of opportunistic Spinosum Arbopedetis called Silvacrista might migrate to these regions to take the niche of arboreal predators and start hunting on Aerogasters. As Aerogasters are generally a worse food source compared to a Centipenta, they will get somewhat smaller to adapt to their new diet. Additional to that, their hunting strategies that were used on completely arboreal pentacrabs might not work on flying Aerogasters. To solve this problem, they might develop a patagium that will allow them to glide between trees, thereby allowing them to catch flying Aerogasters. To support an even bigger patagium, their limbs might elongate, allowing them to glide over longer distances and have a greater control over their trajectory. Followed by this adaptation, this group might eventually transition to a completely new to Methania way of locomotion, powered flight. First of all, their body will need to become more streamlined to reduce drag. Their mouth appendages and eye stalks will become much shorter, and several spikes will be reduced to just a few pairs on each side. As you might know, powered flight is a very energy-reliant process that requires numerous changes in their physiology. First of all, they will need to find a way to provide muscles with constant hydrogen flow, so they can function properly. On Earth, birds develop a unique respiratory system involving air sacs that push air through their lungs in one-way flow, allowing for continuous and efficient oxygen exchange even when they exhale. On Methania, however, Silvacrista might solve this problem in a different way. As you might remember, their respiratory system, unlike that of birds, has different openings for entrance and exit. This way, there will be no need to develop any air sacs, as flying fast enough by itself will ensure constant airflow through the lungs. To optimize this process even more, their openings might get wider, allowing more air to flow through, providing them with more hydrogen, and thereby providing their muscles with required hydrogen. Another essential requirement for supporting their flight is maintaining their organs at optimal temperatures. Both muscles and organs function more efficiently at higher temperatures, making it crucial to keep them operating effectively during the high energy demanding process of flight. Many birds on Earth experience high metabolic fluctuations during the day that are connected with various activities. One of the best examples for that would be hummingbirds, that significantly increase their metabolic rate during the day and fall into torpor during the night. Similar to them, Silvacrista might also develop, although not such extreme, but similar behavior. Additionally to that, they might develop a shivering reflex, allowing them to faster prepare their muscles before the flight and warm them up if it gets too cold. These adaptations will allow Silvacrista to become a very efficient airborne predator and will cause significant threat to Aerogasters. Because of that newly rare threat, they will move towards our strategic reproduction and lay up to 20 larvae during one reproductive cycle. Additional to that, their larvae might develop a way to produce some sort of toxin to protect themselves from Silvacrista that might use their mouth tentacles that will resemble beaks to get them out of the tree trunks. To signal their toxicity, they might develop a form of aposematism that relies on their bright and unusual coloration to warn off potential predators. On Earth, animals often use colors that strongly contrast with green foliage. On Methania, however, plants use much darker pigments, making them appear gray, so rules for toxicity display might be less strict compared to Earth. This way, larvae of Aerogasters might use a combination of red and white colors, thereby increasing their survival rate. While coastal swamps with many trees encourage the majority of species to adapt for an arboreal lifestyle, a small group of Tentatus called Paludambulators might prefer a more terrestrial lifestyle and become more omnivorous, feeding both on small pentacrabs but also west-crawling Clathromethania. To adapt for their more ground-dwelling locomotion, their legs might get longer, but unlike their arboreal counterparts, instead of having sprawling posture, they might develop a semi-erect posture, resembling that of monitor lizards and now extinct Pelagosaurus. Although this posture will be less stable, it will allow them to support more weight, thereby grow somewhat bigger and redirect energy previously needed to support their weight to support faster locomotion. Their shells that were primarily used to reflect sun rays and thereby keep their body color will get smaller and thinner, as another, more efficient way of thermoregulation starts to develop. Their rudimentary back flaps will develop a net of blood vessels, thereby allowing these creatures to lose heat by transferring it from their body to their environment, similarly to how elephants and jackrabbits use their ears. To control how much heat they transfer, they will develop stronger muscles that will allow them to flap their thermoregulatory flaps, thereby increasing heat dissipation, but also develop a way to control their blood flow and by lowering it, decrease heat dissipation. These flaps will also develop small blue areas that will be used to stand out from the trees, thereby attracting other members of their species. As time passes by, some of the Paludambulators, whether by accident or because of competition for resources, will eventually venture to vast and dry steppes, where they might split into two major groups. Both these groups will develop a form of viviparity, similar to that of Spinosum Arbopedetis, but instead of having a chamber on each side, they will have one big chamber in the middle. First of all, it's important to notice that steppes will be much drier than coastal swamps, thereby limiting the growth of larger plants, and those plants that evolve to live here will develop roots that dig deeper into the soil to reach the underground water sources. These roots will often have several tubers that will serve as water and nutrient storages, and will somewhat resemble potatoes. These adaptations will allow larger plants to rarely grow in challenging conditions of these regions, while allowing smaller plants to spread rapidly and thrive, as they require much less water to grow. The first group of ambulators that will adapt to live in steppes will be called Bluventambulators. These creatures will develop a grazing behavior, feeding mostly on small grasses and their roots. To be better adapted to this new diet, similarly to Pentacrab Ossifragus, they might develop a chamber in their body that will support microbial activity, but instead of neutralizing oxalic acid, it will mostly help digesting cellulose, found in cell walls of grasses. To gather low-growing grasses more efficiently, their mouth appendages will elongate. The second group will be called Capturambulators. This group, unlike their relatives, will occupy a niche of steppe predators. Their mouth tentacles will get significantly bigger and firmer, allowing them to execute stronger bites, thereby killing their prey. Around the fifth predators on Earth engage in cooperative hunting. These, unlike solitary hunters, build hunting groups, allowing them to prey on animals much bigger than one individual can handle alone, providing more food for the whole group. Similar to animals on Earth, capturambulators will start building small groups of 5 members and prey on Bluventambulators, thereby compensating for the smaller size. Communication among these groups will be mostly based around their body language, especially around their tails' positions, but also will be supported by acoustic communications. Similar to Spinosum Arbopedetis, it will be supported by the clicking of their strong mouth appendages against each other. With these adaptations, capturambulators will become very efficient predators. To have higher chances of survival, Bluventambulators might also start building groups that can be described as herds. This herd-like behavior will be advantageous because it will increase their ability to detect and respond to potential threats by increasing their vigilance. Vigilance describes the behavior in which an animal or a group of animals monitor their surroundings to ensure that there are no predators nearby. It is often associated with social animals, as it highly relies on similar altruistic behavior from other members of their group. Similarly to Spinosum Arbopedetis, competition of males for females might occur and lead to sexual dimorphism, which will be expressed by longer mouth appendages and greater overall size among males. Development of vigilance and the somewhat complex social structure will also require development of more complex communication patterns and structures. Similarly to their sister clade, they will communicate by using body language, but with higher sociality, they might take it to another level. To express more complex signals such as mood, group cohesions, presence and location of predators, they might integrate not only their back flaps, but also their mouth appendages as a way of communication as well. To make these signals more noticeable, these parts will develop much stronger coloration. Additionally, they will develop an acoustic communication system unique to Bluventambulators. Similar to animals on Earth, they might incorporate their respiratory system to produce sounds, but instead of developing a vibrating membrane, they will do something else. While they are exhaling, air will pass through the pairs of specialized holes located at the back part of their body, creating a loud sound similar to some wind instruments. All these ways of communication will allow them to express numerous signals and emotions, facilitating interaction within their social groups. One of the most common signals will be indication of mating behavior. To express it, males will spread their mouth appendages and unfold their back flaps, thereby appearing bigger. From these herbivorous Bluventambulators, another group will split and adapt to live in wet regions such as coastal swamps. This new species will primarily feed on Hydrophylithosa, which previously lacked natural consumers, and consequently led to the creation of expensive dead zones. To optimize their feeding behaviors, their mouth might elongate, thereby creating a shovel-like structure that will allow them to feed on these fast-growing plants, by simply scooping up large clumps of vegetation with each feeding motion. As mentioned before, Hydrophylithosa is a plant that is able to reproduce rapidly, creating almost unlimited food source for this new species, which will lead to them growing much bigger than their relatives. This newly developed group, called Pelaambulators, will play a very important role in swamp's ecosystem by eating Hydrophylithosa and thereby reducing the chance of ecological dead zones forming. Other groups that will migrate from coastal swamps to steppes will be Silvacrista and Pentacrab Ossifragus. As mentioned before, steppes will be much drier compared to coastal swamps, which might significantly slow down growth of moisture-loving Radicis Amara and make the development of the Detritivores more likely. While Pentacrab Ossifragus will be already adapted for this niche and will have no problem integrating in the steppes ecosystem, Silvacrista, that is mostly fed on soft Aerogasters, will require some significant changes in their physiology. First of all, their wings might elongate, and eventually, similar to pterosaurs and bats on Earth, their front finger might become a part of their wing, thereby significantly increasing the time they are able to spend flying. To better tear chunks of meat, their upper mouth appendages will get much firmer and develop a hook-like structure similar to that of Earth vultures and eagles. As mentioned before, Radicis Amara won't be as widely spread as in swamps, which means that neutralization of oxalic acid won't be a required adaptation to scavenge, so these creatures won't need to change their digestive system a lot. Let's call this group Silvacrista. The development of these unique ecosystems will serve as a stabilizer of Methania's atmosphere. Plants will stop overproducing hydrogen, and planet's cooling will stop. But before it happens, formation of bigger ice caps will begin, and global sea level will sink, revealing new horizons for organisms of Methania to colonize. In the next episode, we will explore how life will colonize and adapt to live on newly formed islands, creating very interesting ecosystems. Thank you for watching. If you want to see more, make sure to like and subscribe. And a big thank you for all artists who submitted their artworks for this episode, making it look significantly better. If you want to submit your artwork for the next episode, stay updated, and now participate in new art contests, feel free to join our Discord. And remember, never stop exploring.